Hello and welcome to the beautiful Rossendale Valley. Hello and welcome to episode 4 on Geography of the Rossendale Valley. In this episode we're going to look at ecosystems. There are 3 main ecosystems that we have in the Rossendale Valley. We can see 2 of them clearly from this location. If we look to the east over the valley we can see Cowp Hill. The top of Cowp Hill looks brown sandy colour. That is our moorland ecosystem and it's similar to the ecosystem I have here right in front of me. That's the main ecosystem that covers most of the Rossendale Valley. If you look further down into the valley, we have trees and large areas of trees at that. That would be our second ecosystem. That's our woodland ecosystem. Our third and final ecosystem that is not here, that we can't really see from this location, is our wetland ecosystem. This is next to our reservoirs, next to our rivers, high up in the moorland in boggy conditions. These wetland ecosystems are ecosystems that are covered in water for most of the year. But before we look at our ecosystems in detail, we actually need to know what an ecosystem is. Please join me as we look at what an actual ecosystem is and look at some specific examples.
So what is an ecosystem? So the definition of an ecosystem is as follows: a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. So in terms of an ecosystem, it can be anything from small scale, like a pond, or the bottom of your garden, to very large scales, such as whole countries. So an example that's just come up here is a small scale ecosystem. We have a pond that you could find in your garden or in a local park. We have the interacting relationship between the organisms. So we have the frog, the tadpoles, the flies, the fish, and their physical environment. So you have the sun, which is not living, and you have the water, and you have the soil that surrounds and that provides nutrients to the grasses there. So these are all interacting together, they're working together to make sure that the ecosystem survives. So if you removed one part of this ecosystem, for example the water, it would completely break down because all these plants and animals within this pond ecosystem rely on this water. So everything needs to be in perfect harmony for an ecosystem to survive. Now there are 2 parts of an ecosystem: the organisms and their physical environment. Organisms are living things. So they're things that are alive that can reproduce. We call these things biotic. So these are biotic parts of our ecosystem. They are living, they can reproduce. The non-living things, the physical environment, the weather for example, the water, the soil that provides nutrients to the grasses, they would be non-living, and we call these abiotic parts of our ecosystem. Now in terms of our ecosystems, they cannot form anywhere. They need specific conditions to survive. For example, this pond ecosystem needs water, so it would need rainfall in this area to provide water for the pond so that then the ecosystem could thrive. So let's have a look at the 2 main factors that influence where an ecosystem is located within the UK. So these 2 factors are weather and the relief of the land. So the weather, sunshine, rainfall, they're the conditions that you find outside at any one time. The relief of the land is the height and the shape of the land. So mountains, hills, flatlands, valley sides. That's what we refer to as the relief of the land. So as the weather changes, as the relief of the land changes, you're going to have changes in the types of ecosystem in an area. Let's now have a look at the weather conditions and the relief of the land that we have in different parts of the Rossendale Valley.
So different parts of the valley can experience different types of weather at any one time. You could have in Rossendale very light winds, but high up in the moorlands above Rossendale, very strong winds. This means that the valley's climate is very diverse. So we're going to look at 3 different locations within the valley and take different weather readings on the same day and look at exactly how it changes depending on where you are in the valley. Our first location is here high up on the valley sides. In this location you would expect high winds and rainfall. Today it's quite a dry day, but early on during the day we did have some relief rainfall fall up here. Like I said, with the wind speed, let's take the reading now. How we take our readings is on this device. This device is an anemometer. It measures wind speed in meters per second. So let's have a look at this now. So right now for this location, we have between 4 and 5 meters per second for our wind speed. It's quite low for our moorland landscape. This could go a lot higher than that, maybe even double and treble on a very windy day. This anemometer also has a thermometer within it, which measures temperature. Let's have a look at that now. The temperature for this location is 10 degrees Celsius, so it's quite cool up here. Let's compare this now to down on the valley floor and have a look at the weather conditions down there. So we've moved down about 100 metres in altitude and we've made our way down into the river valley from the top of the moorlands. In terms of the weather characteristics here, they are slightly different. Let's have a look at the wind speed and the temperature readings down at this point. Now in terms of the wind speed down here, it's decreased. We're now looking at between 3 and 4 metres per second, whereas at the top of the valley we were between 4 and 5. So the lower wind speeds down here may have an impact on the type of ecosystem you see. The temperature has also increased down here. Because there is less wind speed to impact the wind chill factor, the temperature is higher. We're looking around 12 degrees down here, a couple of degrees hotter. So that will also impact the ecosystem that we'll get down in this tributary valley. Let's now have a look at what the weather characteristics are in the main valley, river valley itself by the River Irwell. We've now made our way back down to the main valley floor. As you can see around me, the landscape here is much different. So let's have a look what the weather conditions are down here. The wind speed down here has dropped drastically. It's struggling to get up to 1 metres per second. So we've got much lower wind speeds down here. So that might have a big influence on what type of vegetation will grow here. Along with the wind speed, if I look at the temperature, we've got up to 16 degrees down on this valley floor. An increase many degrees there. So as we've gone down the valley, from the moorland down to the valley floor, our wind speed has dropped and our temperatures have increased. This will definitely have an impact on the different ecosystems that we find within the valley.
So now we've looked at the weather conditions for different parts. Our 4 main ecosystems in the entire of the UK are wetlands, moorlands, woodlands and heathlands. Wetlands, moorlands and woodlands all occur in the valley, and we're going to look at these in a bit more detail later on. But first of all, let's look at the characteristics of these ecosystems as a whole. So for wetlands, these are large areas of wet ground that form in areas of high rainfall. So here, the climatic conditions have the biggest impact on where wetlands form. They need high levels of rainfall. Woodlands, they're large areas of land that are covered in trees. Now we know from science that plants need water to survive. So these trees need water. So these are only going to really occur in areas with high rainfall too. Moorlands, these are large areas of highland covered in vegetation that can only survive at high altitude, e.g. heather. So relief impacts where moorlands can thrive in the UK. So moorlands could only survive at high altitudes, so high up in the hills. And the final one that isn't in the Rossendale Valley are heathlands. These we do find in the UK, but these are more in coastal regions. So large areas of low-lying land where vegetation that needs sandy soil grows. So here you need sandy soil, which is found in coastal areas that are low-lying, so that at low altitude. So relief impacts where heathlands are located. Now let's have a look at where these ecosystems are located within the UK. So this map shows the UK and it shows where Rossendale is on the UK. So we're in the northwest of England. Now in the north of Scotland, we see a lot of our woodland and wetland ecosystems. And in the southeast of England, it's mostly arable farmland and urban areas. Our heathland occurs around the coasts in our sandy soils, where we'd expect to find it. And let's have a look now at Rossendale. Now, it's showing Rossendale we are in an area of farmland. We've got some urban areas surrounding us, which we do. We have Manchester just to the south. But it says we can't really see it in much detail, but there is some blue splodges here. So our predominant ecosystem within the Rossendale Valley should be wetlands and bogs. Wetlands and bogs occur in our moorland ecosystem as well. So these moorland ecosystems and wetland ecosystems work hand in hand. So whenever we'll find a wetland ecosystem, we will find a moorland ecosystem as well. So our main two ecosystems that we're likely to see in the Rossendale Valley are our wetlands and our moorlands. Let's now have a look at these ecosystems in more detail and look at some specific examples within the Rossendale Valley, starting with our moorland ecosystem.
Here we are high up in the moorland. We're just on one of the valley sides above the grain reservoirs. This is the first ecosystem that we're going to look at in the Rossendale Valley. Moorland ecosystems only occur at high altitude. That means high up in the hills, high up in the mountains. The reason behind this is that there's a soil beneath the ground. The soil is very acidic. That means that it's very poor quality for growing crops. So us as humans, we don't try and grow our crops in moorland landscapes because the crops would just die. But a lot of plants do love this acidic soil. Here we have some heather, we have some thick grasses. These types of plants love the acidic soil and they thrive in the moorland landscape. Also, if you look at them, they're all low to the ground, they're all short. The reason behind this is, up in the moorland landscape, the winds get very high, up to 80 miles an hour up in the Scottish Highlands. If we had tall trees here, these high winds would blow them over. Therefore, that's why they can't survive up in the moorland. The vegetation that thrives here has to be low to the ground. We do also have some mosses and lichens that live on the ground. They love it here because they love a wet landscape. We also get high rainfall here, so these can thrive off the wet conditions. In terms of the plants and in terms of the animals, that live up here, we have animals that live low to the ground. We have some mice, for example, some hares, some rabbits. They can live in these ecosystems. Birds thrive in these ecosystems, especially ground nesting ones. You might be able to hear there's some chirping around me right now. You can't see them because they live in nests on the ground. They thrive up here because they can hunt the small animals, but also there's lots of insects that live on the ground as well, so they can hunt them as well. So that's our first ecosystem, the moorland ecosystem. We're now going to look at our second one, which is our wetland ecosystem. So here we find ourselves at our second ecosystem, the wetland ecosystem. I'm high up in the moors above Bacup, where we have high amounts of rainfall, which is what wetland ecosystems need to form. So that's why they form in the Rossendale Valley. The Rossendale Valley is in the northwest of the UK and therefore has the highest amount of rainfall in the UK, so perfect conditions for forming wetland. So we know how wetlands form, but what exactly are they? So wetland ecosystems are ecosystems that are submerged in water for most of the year, the majority of the year. So here we have a large body of water. The water level in this body of water will fluctuate, submerging the banks of the body of water underwater, forming our wetland ecosystem. So what kind of plants do we form here? So plants that form in a wetland ecosystem are hydrophilic plants. This means that these plants need their roots submerged in water most of the time. So the reeds on the bank of this body of water behind me would have their roots submerged in the water most of the time, so they can survive there. Living on the water itself, you could have lily pads that are their roots are submerged in the water all the time. So that's the type of plants you get here. What are the animals we get here? So you'd get toads and frogs love wetland ecosystems, so they can lay their eggs in the bodies of water, and then when their eggs hatch into tadpoles, they can swim around in the water. Also, the insects that they thrive on live in the wetland ecosystem. Other animals, you can have otters and voles. They live in the banks of the wetland ecosystems because they hunt for fish within the wetland ecosystem itself. You also have wading birds, such as storks and herons. These have long legs so they can wade through the water, and while they're walking through the water, they can hunt for fish with their long beaks. You also have some ground nesting birds that live on the banks of these ecosystems because they can live off the insects that thrive here too. So that's our second ecosystem, our wetland ecosystem. Let's move on to our third and final ecosystem, which is our woodland ecosystem. Here we find ourselves in our final ecosystem that we're going to look at in the Rossendale Valley. This is our deciduous woodland ecosystem. This is the most biodiversity rich ecosystem that we have in the Rossendale Valley. Just look at it. There's a lot going on here. So let's first of all learn what a deciduous woodland is. So a deciduous woodland is a woodland that contains trees that lose their leaves seasonally. So in the UK, these trees will lose their leaves in the autumn, and they'll stay lost all the way through the winter, and they'll start to grow again in the spring and summer. The reason why they do this, because in the spring and summer months, these are very long days. So there's a lot of opportunity for these trees to photosynthesize in these months. In the winter, they lose their leaves. For one, they don't want to lose water. Trees lose water through transpiration, and in winter, they don't want to lose this water. They need it to survive. So they lose their leaves so that they don't lose water. Also, there's not as much sunlight, so they don't need them as much for photosynthesis. So that's what our deciduous woodland is. Why do they occur in the Rossendale Valley? So here, we're in a tributary valley to the main Irwell Valley. This area is rich in deciduous woodland. The reason behind this is down to the weather and water supply. So with the weather, in a valley, there are sheltered areas. So the wind speed is quite low down here. So this allows the trees to grow nice and tall and not be blown over. If these tried to grow on the moorland, where wind speed's high, they'd be blown over and wouldn't survive. The second point is water supply. A valley has steep sides, where water, when it rains, flows down. So these grow on valley sides because the water will flow down the valley sides into the roots, allowing this water to go up the trunk and help with photosynthesis, allowing the trees to survive. So this gives them perfect conditions to survive, low winds and a high water supply. So like I said at the start of this video, there's high biodiversity within this ecosystem. This biodiversity takes place within different layers of this forest. Let's have a look now in more detail at these 5 layers. So the first layer of our deciduous woodland that we're going to look at is the very top layer. This is the canopy layer, and you can see it over my shoulder behind me. The canopy is the top layer where all of the branches of the trees reach. This layer has the most leaf coverage. The reason behind this layer is the closest to the sun, and trees need sunlight to survive. They need this sunlight for a process called photosynthesis, where they convert the sunlight into energy for themselves. So trees grow up towards the sun to get as much sunlight as they can for their leaves. In the deciduous woodland, this layer changes seasonally. We're now in spring, and we can see that it's full of leaves. This is because we have long days during the spring and summer months. So the trees here grow their leaves in these months so that they can have as much leaf coverage as possible to get as much sunlight to generate energy. Let's have a look at the next layer now, which is below the canopy layer, which is our sapling layer. So this is our second layer, our sapling layer. As you can see, the trees' trunks are a bit smaller and the trees are not as tall. These are because these are saplings, these are younger trees. They've grown on areas of the forest floor where there are not other trees present. When some of the seeds that fall from the tree they might make their way into the soil and then they can start to grow. They grow saplings and grow up towards the sunlight. Some of these saplings don't survive because the forest floor during the summer months is quite dark because of the leaf coverage above. So these saplings survive best in areas where there are gaps within the canopy. As you can see above the saplings, there is a nice big gap in the canopy. So these saplings can get lots of sunlight to photosynthesize, to grow up, and then they'll soon reach the canopy layer where they'll join the canopy layer and be fully grown trees. This is our third layer, this is our shrub layer. So this layer of the forest doesn't have as much activity in. These shrubs struggle to grow because in the summer months, not a lot of sunlight reaches down to the forest floor. So these shrubs thrive in the winter months. So during the winter months, when the canopy doesn't have any leaves on it, because the deciduous trees lose their leaves, this shrub layer can thrive. Sunlight can reach all the way down to the forest floor. So these shrubs, such as these ferns, can get lots of sunlight then, and that's when they photosynthesize the most and start to grow. But during the summer months, they do struggle because they cannot get the sunlight because this is blocked by the canopy layer above. This is our fourth layer of our deciduous woodland. This is our herb layer. So this layer thrives the most in the spring months, which we're in now, we're in May. So during start of spring, the trees above don't have their leaves. So more sunlight can get down to the forest floor then. So this is our fourth layer of our deciduous woodland. This is our herb layer. This layer thrives during the spring months. We're in the spring months now, we're in May. At the start of the spring months, the trees above don't have their leaves, so a lot of sunlight can reach the forest floor. During this time, the small plants that live on the forest floor, such as these bluebells behind, can get a lot of sunlight. So this is when they start to grow and start to shoot up. So they make the most of the canopy not being there so they can take in as much sunlight as possible and photosynthesize. So during the springtime, our deciduous woodland floors come to life. You're going to see bluebells like behind me, daffodils growing. All these grow because there's no canopy to block the sunlight. After the spring months, this herb layer will start to die down because the trees above have a thick canopy of leaves. So there's very little sunlight that can reach this forest floor. So they start to die out and go back into their bulbs and then ready to go again at the start of spring in the following year. Our final layer is the forest floor. This layer thrives the most during the winter months. In winter, the canopy is not there, so a lot of sunlight can reach the forest floor. And the plants here on the forest floor can thrive. One of these plants is moss, which like this here. This moss loves wet conditions, so the forest floor is a perfect place for it. During the winter months where we have high rainfall, the rainfall will fall down into the forest floor because there's no canopy to intercept it, and it'll be absorbed by the soil. These mosses can then grow on this soil because there's sunlight reaching the forest floor in winter. So they can start to grow, they can photosynthesize and absorb all the water to help them thrive. So these conditions are very dark and very damp. Perfect for our mosses to thrive. So that's it for our layers of the forest. We have our canopy, we have our sapling layer, we have our shrub layer, our herb layer, and the forest floor itself. So that's it. There are three main ecosystems in the valley: our moorlands, our wetlands, and our woodlands. There are many other ecosystems within the valley, right down to small-scale ecosystems, such as ponds, and even your back garden would be a small-scale ecosystem. Why don't you go out and have a look at these ecosystems and have a look at what wildlife that you can spot in them. So that's it for the physical part of the geography of the Rossendale Valley. We're now going to look at how humans have impacted the valley and look at how settlement has changed the valley that we live in today. Thank you very much for watching this episode, and I'll see you next time.